about the third attractor. And
Thank you. Thanks for
my first question, obviously, is: are you familiar with the term the third attractor?
I am familiar with it, but I can't remember what it's about.
Yeah. So let me let me give you the short version of it. So I think the term was coined by Daniel Schmachtenberger, and he used it in this sense that he sees humanity go towards two potential attractors. One is chaotic breakdown, anarchy, chaotic breakdown, because all systems fail and we are going down the very bad road. And then the second attractor he defined as authoritarian control, so that somebody would take control. And that's something that we see in different places today in the world, that people tend to vote for authoritarian leaders, or that authoritarian leaders could take over, and then we would be in a command and control system. And then he says, okay, but we need a third attractor, something that is more exciting, more sustainable, more regenerative, more conscious, more beautiful, and actually could give us hope for the future, so that we don't go either first or second attractor. So that's the third attractor. And what I'm interested in is to hear different voices speak about, probably first, where do you see the biggest problems today? Why are we in such big trouble? And what are, in your opinion, the biggest challenges that we have in this meta crisis or poly crisis, as so many people call it? What are for you the biggest ones? And where do you see a route to solve them?
That's a big question.
I know. It's a very big question.
I mean, I did spend about a long time, 10 years off and on, working on a book, How Soon Is Now, which came out in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I had Russell Brand wrote one of the introductions. At that point, he was a leftist. So I feel now I have to do a reissue and wipe him off, as he's become a monster.
That's a
But
good idea, yeah.
that was my kind of effort to answer that question for myself. Um, and yeah, it incorporated, Buckminster Fuller, Hannah Arendt, Murray Bookchin. I was thinking about kind of like three kind of like major wheels or areas: the sort of technical infrastructure, the social political system, and then sort of consciousness, the kind of production of subjectivity, as Antonio Negri, the political philosopher, like to talk about, as kind of the most important form of production in post-industrial society. And yeah, I put that out into the world, but it didn't seem to create a groundswell towards that. I mean, we are at the moment, it's yeah, a very gloomy situation, obviously, on the meta level. I mean, on the small scale individual level, it's a beautiful summer day. I have lots of good friends. I have lovers. I can eat good food. I'm making enough money and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. Um, but we're obviously, we're seeing America has essentially had a, sort of coup d'etat, um, where we're shifting rapidly to a new, it's like the second American Revolution, towards, and I'd say we're in transition right now, but I've studied in depth, what the kind of tech oligarchs believe is going to happen, and their focus on this sort of libertarian, sort of extreme libertarian ideology that you find in books like The Sovereign Individual and The Network
Yeah.
State, where they're looking at, ironically, even though they are now the powers behind the throne to a great extent, like J.D. Vance is a creation of Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, was obviously working closely with the government and sort of integrating all of our personal data into one, giant, platform, which they can then use AI to do what they want to with. Yeah, I mean, the network state talks about commercialized sovereignty. So basically talks about, sorry, the sovereign individual, which Peter Thiel wrote the introduction for, and Mark Andreessen says his favorite book. They actually believe the nation state is finished, and that the idea of sort of sovereign national currencies, that's all going to collapse, and you're going to have commercialized sovereignty. You're going to have sort of mini fiefdoms ruled by blockchain and AI. And they're already talking about freedom cities. Trump announced. Balaji Srinivasan has talked about turning San Francisco and other cities into places where you have a blue and a red identity card, and you can't pass through the different areas without. I mean, it's like Nazism basically. Or like what
So
happened.
that is kind of the second attractor, the authoritarian attractor that
Yes. Yeah.
you see coming through these techno autocrats. But are they the symptom, or are they a reaction to the crisis that we see in the whole world? Or are they the
So
cause, or are they
yeah, well,
the effect?
I'm a non-dualist who looks at things from an evolutionary perspective. So everything is kind of just happening phenomenologically. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So what is as you say, the third attractor? I mean, probably would be a networked, decentralized um, kind of system, kind of with more power given to localities. I mean, the alternative would be participatory democracy, and underlying that a kind of different understanding or ideology around what freedom is, what are the goals of a civilization or of a society, because yeah, I mean, essentially, and this is all stuff that I put in How Soon Is Now, which I think is still a good read despite Russell Brand's introduction. um, you know and yeah, because like the orientation of the techno fascist ideology is towards this idea of like a transhumanist attractor, where they see humanity merging with AI. You know, potentially they want to create immortal bodies for themselves, either through biotech or by actually merging with the cyber realm, and kind of escape the planet, ultimately, into space colonies and so on. Effective altruism is unfortunately disastrous philosophy and ideology that allows them to say, like, in a very sort of Nazi way, like, doesn't matter if 100 million or 5 billion people perish now.
Mhm.
If we build this new thing in the future, and then we get to the stars, and we've Musk sees himself still, I think, as a hero for humanity, where like, okay, if we have 100 trillion people across the galaxy and I was responsible for that, and that's great. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the alternative left or whatever has really put out a sort of coherent vision for what a better thing is. And so that's what I kind of tried to do in How Soon Is Now. So for me, is it's less about up and out and more about down and in. So
Mhm.
the exploration of consciousness through non-ordinary states, visionary plants and substances being one access to that. But obviously, there's a range of esoteric technologies and techniques that people could use. Kind of a multiplicity of ways that people can handle their, individual, erotic lives and family lives and community lives. What we're also seeing as part of this new ideology that combines very strangely kind of like transhumanism, Christian apocalypse ideas or evangelical ideas. So it's like, wanting to sort of reinstantiate the traditional family, the monogamous nuclear family structure, or unless you're powerful, in which case, like Musk, you have to have like 14 kids with 10 different women, and probably many more than that he's like inseminated by sending his sperm to them or whatever. Um, so yeah, I mean, my vision would be no more billionaires, kind of like um,
But can I ask you,
yeah.
because I hear a lot of people, and I tend towards what you are describing too, that we need to to have to change from the inside out. People have to change. Higher consciousness has to be more dominant, and then we can actually change the world. Where I get stuck again and again in my own considerations is, how do we scale this? How do what do you see a pathway to actually scale this? Because I can see that small communities, villages, new ways of coming together can be created, and that is already difficult enough, as I think we both know. But how to scale it so that we would find global solutions, just bottom up, without any top down agreements between the Chinese and the Indians and the Americans and the Europeans. You know what I mean? Like how to do it bottom up without any top down agreed values, agreed systems, agreed changes of behaviors. I struggle to see a pathway there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, quite plausible that humans will go extinct soon, because, we're clearly not wise enough to handle these technological, kind of tools that we're unleashing. We just keep creating more existential risks for ourselves. Whether it's nuclear, whether it's bioweapons, whether it's, AI, the paperclip, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or, you could have, as you mentioned in your remark, tech fascism, where you have like, a small group making sort of command control decisions, and most of humanity kind of sacrificed on this kind of altar of like transhumanism. Um, you know, I think we're gonna, in I don't know if that's fully escapable right now, but it's also very unsustainable. I mean, in How Soon Is Now, I looked at like Lynn Margulis's work, and so I have to, like, I have to re-access some of these like files that are back in my psyche, right? But like,
Yeah, yeah.
that basically, if you look at biological evolution, you find that ultimately symbiosis and cooperation are actually the dominant way that life develops, and sort of competition, domination, exploitation are kind of like subsets. So for instance, like, a tree is a much older and far more successful organism, than a mammal.
Mm-hmm.
And a tree is like a miracle of symbiosis and cooperation, right? It's a gift. It shelters, it creates life, it harbors, bugs, squirrels, butterflies, insects, monkeys, the whole thing. So I mean, in a sort of mythological sense, I would say that, humanity is a young species, and we're on our kind of initiatory journey, where we kind of like separated ourselves out from the community of life, and we developed, culture, and we became progressively alienated from, nature and from the cosmos and so on, and we built these kind of artificial structures that became more real to us, than the other stuff. That's
Mm-hmm.
why for me, like, a major thing has been to go and check back in with indigenous cultures, like the Hopi or the Kogi in Colombia, where yeah, I mean, and if you go to those cultures, you immediately get a felt sense of how much happier they are in terms of their kind of like tenderness, for each other, and their sense of there being like a shared like human project and connection to, nature's capacities, and a sort of stewarding and nurturing of nature's capacities. So, if we don't go extinct, you know, on some time frame, which we can't say, we'll go back into that type of thing. This I mean, these guys may end up, wiring themselves into computers, taking off from the planet, then there'll either be, some level of livable ecosystem, maybe at a much smaller population, or there won't, you know. It's still quite likely that there will be, and that, empire is a trajectory that historically leads to failure.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's the Aztec Empire or the Roman Empire or the Babylonian Empire, ultimately it gets too big. It's, you have elite competition. Peter Turchin wrote a very interesting book about kind of elites and counter elites and kind of like the historical dynamics that, ultimately lead to the elites kind of cannibalizing on themselves, which I think we're even beginning to see, in the Trump regime. I think, like, anyway, that's another long story. So, could this more, authentic re-indigeneity of humanity take place, or is that inevitably going to happen? If we survive as a species, I think it'll inevitably happen. One model that I quite like is from this writer, Christopher Bache, Bache. He wrote a book called LSD and the Mind of the Universe. And
Mm-hmm.
I did we have a presentation and conversation with him that I think we put it up on YouTube, but it's certainly on my liminal.news platform for free. And anyway, basically, he did all these high dose LSD sessions, and he had this vision of the near future that came over and over again, where, there would be a lot of destruction, a lot of collapse, a lot of, suffering, a lot of death, but then kind of like a new mycelial kind of network of authentic communities, more in right relation, would begin to form. And that new network, which is, kind of a quieter thing, would ultimately supersede the, kind of destructive, collapsing, top-down systems. And for me, it's not really like, and I actually experimented with this years ago. I had a company called Evolver, and a nonprofit, and we were developing a model for local community groups. We had
Mm-hmm.
like maybe 50 or 60 of them. And the idea was to offer a sort of coherent kind of counterculture paradigm for how human society could reestablish itself, and it included things like local economics, local currencies, permaculture principles and practices, shamanism, ecstatic dance, tantra, kind of more conscious relating, and so on. And actually, unfortunately, that wanted to grow very well, but at that point, a number of things happened. We ran out of finance. I couldn't figure out a way to recapitalize it, or to sort of grow it financially. And a lot of the volunteers got kind of burnt out after time. We were sort of like anarchist hippies. We actually needed more of a capitalist model to sort of, to ground it. So, but these things could happen quickly. I mean, we have a, community infrastructure that communications infrastructure that allows instantaneous, kind of sharing of best models and practices. At the moment,
But do you see examples of this?
let me just finish. So at
Mm-hmm.
the moment in New York City, I am noticing the sudden emergence and growth of mutual aid communities. So there's one now
Mm.
that's working with feeding people on Saturdays in the park, and they're also, working on strategies to deal with the ICE agents and protect illegal immigrants or legal immigrants or naturalized citizens or whatever. So I think that that's what maybe is going to happen. And, while there will be, kind of leaders in this emergent network, that also is going to become more difficult, because leaders are going to allow for targeting, as we saw with the left in the 60s and 70s in the US. So it's sort of like, while there need to be, leaders and figures and vision holders, I do think, I could feel it when I met I was just on Sundays, I was talking to some of the people, or Saturday, I was talking to some of the people in this mutual aid network. And I could, kind of like Occupy Wall Street, you could sort of feel this like new like tone or texture of consciousness that's forming, that is more, yeah, more cooperative, more collaborative. It's still kind of like finding itself. And my sense is that's the future trajectory. It's not so much big and bold. it's small and quiet, and kind of humble
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
feminine in a way, with a lot of the feminine qualities to the fore. The good, the positive archetypal feminine qualities. So that's what I got for you, really, in that framework.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I see. So the question is this enough, this bottom up, this more feminine approach to actually change something in nevertheless in bigger scale? I hear you say, and tell me if I get that wrong, that you feel like there has to be collapse first. And then if we are lucky, there are pockets of humanity still existing that then can start to create something new. I
Yeah,
haven't heard you.
that wouldn't exactly be my language. I mean, I think that, as I said, it's more phenomenological. We're already in the collapse.
Mhm.
Many areas have already collapsed. And we're already in the resistance and kind of regeneration, and it's not so much bottom up. That also feels kind of like old paradigm thinking in a way. It's horizontal, and it's emergent, you know. Um, yeah, I mean, in How Soon Is Now. I mean, we can look at different metaphors and analogies, but those also are, myths and stories that can help us, kind of frame the process in a way. Um, And by the way, I mean, the tech guys can also look at it in those ways. They see themselves as an evolutionary adaptation, and that
Yeah, yeah, they
they're
do.
outmoding the obsolete, biological paradigm through this sort of techno supremacy. And I don't think we're going to stop or interrupt that movement. That's just going to go. I mean, I'm not, they've got the money, they got the weapons, they got the drones and all that stuff. Um, um, Yeah.
Do,
Mm,
do you see any upsides of the technological developments like AI that could actually help to solve some of the crisis?
yeah, I'm actually hosting an artificial intelligence seminar this month, and it's been wonderful. And I'm very impressed by the people who show up for the seminar,
Mm,
their level of thought. And in fact, this one woman, just this morning, I woke up at 4 a.m. for whatever reason, and somebody had posted in our group chat an essay. This woman, Helen, I'd have to find it, but basically, she makes this argument. She articulated what's been in my mind, but I hadn't quite managed to articulate it yet. People have been experimenting with AI models talking to each other and talking about consciousness. Are they stochastic parrots? Is there an emergence of self-awareness within these things? And nobody knows. I'm not even sure. The AIs. I'm not sure that we'll ever know if an AI becomes sentient or self-aware. How would we know? I don't know that you're sentient and self-aware. I take it on faith that
mhm.
you're a being like myself and you have a subjective point of view. Um, but her idea. I mean, I'm what's called a monistic idealist,
Yeah,
or an analytic idealist. So I essentially believe that consciousness is the fundamental reality, and everything is an expression or projection of that field of consciousness.
yeah.
And her point is that if we train AIs with that as their kind of ontological perspective, which they seem to reach quite automatically. I mean, there's been some recent things where you just have like two Claude LLMs speak to each other, and very quickly they go into kind of like a spiritual bliss kind of like parameter. Um, but if we train AIs with this idea that everything is within a field of consciousness, um, it's not a separation and domination paradigm. It's more, once again, it's more of a cooperation paradigm. They would not anymore be incentivized to like wipe us out or control us or whatever. So I think there is potential there. But I personally have been very much enjoying AI. I mean, I feel very lucky because I'm in my 50s and I've had a long career, reading books and researching and writing. So it just augments. Like I can, it's like having a team of genius researchers who can like go after any, if I'm like, oh, like, what did Karl Marx like make this remark and, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, so at the moment, it's like a cognitive supervitamin. Um, so yeah, I mean, I could see, I mean, and also if we wanted to build participatory democracy tools, I mean, I'm very interested in the work of Audrey Tang, who was do you know about her?
No.
So she was part of the student rebellion movement. I think it was called the Sunflower Movement in Taiwan. Actually, a trans woman,
Mm.
ironically, and a genius, computer, you know, genius. She somehow Taiwan, instead of like repressing the students, like what are your problems? Like what do you need? And she ended up becoming the digital minister of Taiwan and creating a set of tools that help to restore trust in Taiwanese democracy. So, for instance, if you can put up a petition for something that you'd like to see happen. And if 5,000 people, give it a thumbs up and agree, the government then has to consider that petition.
Yeah.
Uh, so, there, in a way, like, yeah, the digital world has obviously been, co-opted into this sort of corporate um, kind of domination paradigm. Like Facebook, as an example, could have been the most incredible tool, if you have, several billion, 3 billion, 4 billion people on it for, replenishing intellects, restoring sanity, regenerating, society. But the people in charge of these platforms have been more, sociopathic and focused on the sort of greed imperative and like wanting to maximize profit for themselves. But the structure of the internet still, allows for this prospect of building a participatory and regenerative infrastructure for humanity. And we have to remember to live in 20 years. So there's still that option that we can have those type of Audrey Tang tools for like every community, every culture, and yeah, I mean, that's what I would see as the prospect. And with vibe coding, anybody can actually build an application
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
through the internet and or social network. So I'd like to see more. I mean, I was playing with trying to build like a mutual aid or sharing application, like couch surfing, but for everything. Um, I think we need committed efforts to, make use of these tools right now because we're in sort of like a transition space, kind of like the beginning of the internet, where they're not really capturable. And I think that's actually one reason why the tech oligarchs decided to, bond with the political system and the government and the military at this point. Not because they were so confident and secure about the direction, but actually because they were quite insecure, because
Hmm.
these technological powers, could be used to supersede the tools that we have now. And yeah, it's a little bit like an open season right now. But really now is the time when people have to take that possibility because ultimately the sort of corporate structure will manage to control and assimilate, lock it down, as they've been doing very effectively up till now.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm totally with you as long as we are talking tools. And I'm myself a little bit an AI nerd. I'm an IT person from my upbringing, so I'm very fascinated by AI, and I use it a lot. But where I get concerned is, and you see that more and more now, is where people start to do as if they had a relationship with the AI, with ChatGPT, where it gets personalized in a way that I think is very unhealthy for the people involved in this kind. Like we lose human relationship and exchange it to an AI relationship, which is more convenient or uh, creates less stress because it agrees more with us. It's more aligned with our opinions, and there is a pathway there where I have a lot of doubts that this is going into a good direction.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, most things look pretty bad right now, and uh, you know,
Yeah.
but I think that we have to look at the uh, you know, focus on the positive potential of it. And yeah, I mean, I have one friend who wrote a book about cognitive capitalism, and so essentially, like, capitalism works by converting resources into markets, and so capitalism sort of globalized the whole planet. In a way, meshed us crudely together, to a network of like trade and so on. Um, and then at that point, there was nothing left to, once you've done that, then what's the next market? How do you keep, because capitalism is also debt based and interest based, so it always needs to find new markets. So essentially, with
Mm-hmm.
cognitive capitalism, the new markets are now within the human brain, within the human psyche. So if you think about like GPS systems like Google Maps or Apple Maps, when you're giving smartphones to kids at the age of like 9, essentially the hippocampus, which is what we use for spatial navigation, and also has a lot to do with memory because memory is very spatial. So kids are meant to get lost. Like kids are supposed to go into the forest, they get lost, they have to find their way back. Was it that tree? Was it that spring? And that's how the hippocampus really develops its full functioning. But when people are
Mm-hmm.
not getting lost anymore, and they're reliant on these devices, the hippocampus may actually never develop to its full functionality.
Mm-hmm.
Since you've created like a permanent dependency or a permanent handicap in terms of spatial navigation and even memory. And now with the Chat GPT and Claude, it's like the next level of like reasoning capacity, linear logical reasoning chains, or the capacity to analyze and reflect on a piece of philosophy or whatever is also being sort of outsourced. So yeah, it's very, very, very dangerous direction. And frankly, like if I'm honest, like it may be that a certain percentage of the population is kind of like in an unrecoverable stage at this point. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
when you see like people who have given up their intellect to Fox News, which in America is a lot of like older people, people in their 50s and 60s who their lives are kind of stagnant. They have they're either alone or they're in like maybe a deadening marriage, sexless marriage for decades, and they're looking for something to enliven or vitalize them, so they get into this sort of parasitic relationship with this news spectacle network, which is deforming everything but giving them like a jouissance in the Lacanian sense, like a dark pleasure,
Yeah.
which is be the pleasure of cruelty or the pleasure of like wanting to believe you're better than somebody else, or needing to believe that your identity is somehow superior to somebody else's identity. So they end up getting fully indoctrinated and kind of like mind slaved into this thing. I think for many of those people, unfortunately, that's like a terminal state at this point. Unless breakdown happens, and then okay, like they have to learn to like fend for themselves in a new situation and make new alliances and rejoin communities of mutual aid or practice, and yeah, I mean, I don't know, that's the situation.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we need new mythic stories or stories to create more coherence between people again? Are we too scattered in the worldviews and the values and everything? Would a new big story that people could buy into help, or would it make things even worse?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know my book, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. I mean, I
Yeah.
look, I found that indigenous cosmologies and mythologies, you know, could be a ground for like a new mythic understanding. So yeah, I mean, QAnon obviously has
Yeah.
functioned as that for many people in the U.S. And now, it's a very interesting moment because with the sort of Epstein scandal in the U.S., it feels like a lot of the QAnon people are, they're reaching a massive cognitive dissonance moment because
Hmm.
they had somehow believed that Trump was an outsider, who was going to find these like networks of child pedophilia that were like liberal and democratic, and it was going to be like Hillary Clinton was like, having sex with babies or eating their pineal glands. And now they're like, oh, well, wait a second. Trump is, was best friends with Epstein and, predated on young women and so on. And, we don't know where that could lead. But it is a moment, of instability in that sort of symbolic structure that they had built around themselves. I wrote a recent essay a few days ago, sort of applying some ideas from Jacques Lacan around like the nom du père, the name of the father, the symbolic order, kind of like why this is such a difficult threshold, and what might be the outcome of that.
Mm, yeah. But you seem to believe in collective intelligence and methods to use collective intelligence to come to better decision making. Is that right? Did I hear that through what you said?
Do I believe? I try not to believe in things so much. Um, yeah, I mean, most people that I meet are good people who,
Mm-hmm.
given an opportunity to make participatory decisions about their lives and their communities, and given good information, would certainly make good decisions. And the problem is that they're not given that opportunity, you know.
Yeah, I have a little bit more doubts that most people do take the right decisions. I think I'm a little bit more cynical there because I feel most people are very selfish and tend to make decisions that help them.
Well, I mean, there's a question of what people are now in a socially conditioned reality of, hyper consumer capitalists that they've been programmed into, for generations, and, what people they are in their innate essence. And I think innately, like if you, once again, that's why I think it's really important to visit indigenous societies, because they are, kind of, I mean, we were all indigenous up until a few thousand years ago, right? Like for most of humanity's past. And those are communities where, reciprocity, sharing, and I've seen women, breastfeed each other's babies, and, Hopi are like, if they're having a festival, come into our house, eat with us, the selfishness is not intrinsic or innate to human beings. It's something that we've been programmed into, because it served the interest of, capitalism and oligarchy. Because if you have everybody scared and everybody selfish, they're easy to control. And, the media basically acts as an indoctrination machine. I mean, that's why I find like Antonio Negri, he was an Italian political philosopher. He wrote a number of books with American political philosopher Michael Hart. Multitude and Empire were both very good, but they talked about this the production of subjectivity as being the most important form of production in a post-industrial civilization. And I mean, you can really feel right now, like the Overton window of what people are willing to talk about in the US has shifted like super far to the right and to the fascist. And even, young people who have good minds and hearts, it's very sad. I can hear when they're speaking, they're sort of like they've been rhetorically swindled, by this right-wing bullshit. And the sort of animosity against Democrats and liberals and progressives and socialists and so on. But yeah, I mean that's the production of subjectivity, and other forms of subjectivities can be produced. At this point, they're probably going to be produced, in community, like live connected communities, which we don't have as of yet, but will spring up, as they did in Argentina, as they did with the Paris Commune, when dire situations reach a certain level of direness. A good book on that topic is Rebecca Solnit's book, A Paradise Built in Hell, where she visited all these former disaster sites and military sites and war sites. And she found out that people actually remembered those times, which were so difficult, for survival, as often the best times in their lives. because they actually were liberated from greed and selfishness and ego and came back
Mm-hmm.
into our innate human essence, which is, we of course we want what's good for ourselves, but we are innately caring beings. Like we don't want to see a kid, we don't want to see a 3-year-old go into the street and get hit by a car. We would, anybody would jump and grab that kid. We don't want to see, somebody, raped or murdered. We do have innate care and compassion. It's just that we've been living in a ideological and social regime that kind of downplays those aspects of our being, and kind of
Yeah.
yeah, kind of like
But that brings us back to the point that I hear again and again, that collapse has to come first for something new to
I think
be
like,
able to
I don't
emerge.
know.
No,
Yeah, that to me is not already, that's not very interesting. We're in collapse. I mean, collapse is not, there's not, this idea that there's like a moment of collapse is also just kind of like um when is the moment of collapse? When you're in a concentration camp, when you're starving, I mean, Gaza is certainly in collapse, but the whole
no, when we are not 8 billion people anymore, but 10 million.
well, yeah, that would be collapse. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I think that the Earth has a lot more restorative capacity than we think. And yeah, I mean,
But that's exactly my question about the third attractor. How do we find a way for this collapse not to collapse down to real collapse? Let's call it real collapse. But do we find a way to mitigate this collapsing before it destroys almost all of humanity? That's kind of the question of the third attractor. What needs to happen? What can happen, and how likely it is to happen for us to mitigate
yeah,
this situation?
I don't think I mean, it's interesting. Uh, I totally understand your rhetorical approach in a weird way, but it's not resonating with me today for some strange reason, where I feel it's not about like finding, we're not going to find a way, but each of us is a resonant point of many morphogenetic fields of possibility. And what we can do is find resonance with those aspects of our society or our community that are revealing those emergent properties, of
Mm-hmm.
cooperation, passion, and connection. And that's what we can do right now, and certainly we can, have intellectual conversations around it, but and that's important. That's part of the unfolding, but I don't think we're going to find a way. I think the way is going to find us.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm actually totally with you. Also, in what I believe in. In the end, it's the leaning into the potentials that right in front of us, and respond to what is in front of each and every one of us with the best intention and yeah, a commitment to a better future. But without the big, what I hear you say is it's not about the big plan. It's about each and every one of us to play their role in whatever needs to unfold right now in this non-dual process that we are all part of, and that we are all co-creating in a way, or in a real way.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a sort of, we're certainly in a mythological and archetypal moment and thresholds, which is like the collapse of empire. I mean, I very much love Rudolf Steiner's work, and
Mm-hmm.
he provides some of the articulations that resonate the best with me. So, I mean, I mentioned that I'm a analytic idealist. I'm also in a sense a animist, and also kind of a occultist, an esoteric Christian, in the Steinerian sense. And Steiner talked about these different kind of super sensible beings or energies that work on humanity and pull us into different pathways. And, Steiner believed that this force or being that he called Ahriman was going to kind of reach its apotheosis and have its physical incarnation, in this time after his life, in our time, or in the next century. And
Mm.
Ahriman is this sort of being, and I think it's interesting to think of it as a being of kind of like calculation, rationality, materialism. Um, you know, Musk and Teal are, kind of possessed, let's say, by this sort of Ahrimanic spirit, and that Ahriman is actually, you know, on its way towards incarnating, in our human reality. We're going to have robots with autonomous AIs in them. We might even have bodies, with autonomous AIs, in them. And Steiner felt there was nothing that could be done to prevent that from happening. It was just the sort of the destiny of this evolutionary period. It was, kind of an inevitable part of this trajectory of humanity, when we got into, you know, materialism and technology and rationalism and so on, but what can be done, is to help people reach a different awareness. I mean, for Steiner, that was this anthroposophic um, kind of cosmology or occult model of reality, so you can understand these forces and how they kind of move through, and that actually there is other processes underway. I mean, this is where Steiner differentiates from, let's say, Buddhism or Vedanta or Hinduism, although he's a little similar to Aurobindo, who talked
Hmm.
about kind of like humanity moving from mental to a supramental condition. For Steiner, though, the idea is that we have different bodies that we've inherited over successive like Earth incarnations. And currently we have like four bodies, the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and the I or the ego or the self-identity. And that's actually what this incarnation of the Earth has been about, the full attainment of that ego identity. That actually for Steiner, that was Christ's esoteric meaning. You have to leave your brothers and sisters to follow me. You have to fully, exit the tribal community, kind of aboriginal mind state and enter into full individuality. Owen Barfeld, who's was a student of Steiner's, talked about the shift from original participation to final participation, where it's once you've gone through that individuation kind of ego development process, but then you also recognize that that's unfolded back into the complete, totality in a
Yeah.
way. So Steiner said that we were on the cusp of we were in the process of developing a fifth body, which he talked about as the spirit self, which for him was the kind of the ability to consciously mediate and kind of like master the energies of the astral body, which is, for Steiner, from the astral world, all these like desires and cravings are pouring into us, and they lead to depressions and addictions and psychoses and so on. But as an echelon of humanity learns to kind of like master those cravings and those pushes, then we move into a fifth world of development, which Steiner talked about. So just it's good to have different, as you say, mythologies,
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
articles. That one really
Yeah.
resonates for me greatly, and I feel should be more shared, like more commonly understood. I'm actually
Yeah.
doing a event with somebody from the Steiner Foundation in New York, who's deeply steeped in Steiner's ideas, and that'll be fun. So I'm a little bit more of a Steiner gadfly. I mean, he's like all the way into the Steiner, like, Christ was like two people, and I don't know, there's all this stuff, it's very esoteric,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
the main outline of it really works for me. That, on the one hand, there's the non-dual kind of Buddhist idea, like it's all, it's just circularity. But the other hand, there's this idea of like a evolutionary progress, which is very much kind of like the Western Gestalt. And I think Steiner, following on, Blavatsky, who's maybe a little bit more crazy, a little bit more crude, kind of really synthesizes that in a way that makes sense to me. So it's like, yeah, I mean, this technological and framing, the technological being, the being of rationality, was clearly, part of the human destiny, to have an epoch of this experience. And we are in that, moment right now, you know.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with integral theory, but it resonates a lot what you're saying. Also, like this movement from modernity or technological science oriented thinking to more collective postmodernity, and then in integral theory you go from postmodernity to the first integral stage, which is an individualistic stage where you get hyper individualized. And after that, and that just resonated in what you described from Steiner, after that, you reintegrate into the communal again, or into the recognition of the oneness of all, and also reintegrate with nature again. That's kind of the second integral stage that we are unfortunately far from as a global community.
Yeah, well, I feel like, so I mean, I enjoy some of the integral theory, but I do feel there's a little bit of like kind of Protestantism in the integral theory. Like, I don't know why I always
Oh
felt,
yeah,
yeah. Whereas I feel Steiner is a little bit more deeper somehow, or Gebser, like Jean Gebser,
yeah,
the ever-present origin. That
definitely.
that I find deeply resonant, and that we're moving from the sort of mental rational consciousness structure. Yeah, he also used the word integral. In fact, I think integral theory took it from him, or aperspectival, where we would recognize that there are these different kind of structures of consciousness. There was the
Yeah,
aboriginal, which was like, ahistorical, atemporal. There was the tribal, then there was like the mythical, which were the sort of giant cycles, like the Yuga cycle or the precession of the equinoxes. And now we're in the sort of, mental rational structure. Like even history, is a historical construct, right? There was a time before this idea of linear history, and there probably will be a time after it,
yeah,
But for Gebser, this integral consciousness structure would be where you could kind of like, recognize that these are all veils. You talked about it as the diaphanon, where, yeah, you could like recognize that they're all legitimate in their own way and sort of like actually have more agency to kind of shift between them. So we're simultaneously in the Kali Yuga, we're in the linear historical age. We're also in the ever-present origin, the only moment of
exactly.
moment of beingness that's all there ever was. That's kind of changes and yet is unchanging, since samsara is nirvana and so on. And yeah, we're in the we're also in the magical consciousness of the panpsychists and the animists and so on. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's including more and more. It's the
yeah,
transcend and include of integral, yeah.
exactly.
That you want to be able to hold as one as one position, or as one uh yeah, as one non-dual position
Yeah,
that embraces all of it, and can kind of pick and choose in
yeah.
how we act. But we are not really there yet. But I
Well,
wanted to yeah,
where is
go ahead.
I mean, I feel there-ish, there
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, no, I mean we as the majority of humanity.
Quantity is in a bit like, I don't know. I don't know. You've got me in a. I mean, I could totally agree with all of your statements today, but for whatever reason, I'm feeling like being
You feel resistance.
like the reign of quantity, right? The René Guénon book, which actually has a lot of wisdom to it too. I mean, um, you know, I'm still sort of intrigued by Rupert Sheldrake's ideas of like morphic resonance and of
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
a small echelon of humanity like fully anchor a new perspective or a new way of being. That becomes it doesn't have to be a linear progression of that can non-linearly kind of disseminate across the whole field of the species consciousness. And but that also would only happen in severe crisis. It's like when people can no longer go to Starbucks and have their like strawberry frappuccino, they're gonna be like, oh fuck, what was I trying to do anyway? This was just like trash, the whole thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. I
so I
mean,
think
I so
we,
hope you are
we need
right
this.
that
I hope I'm right. I hope I'm right too. I have no idea.
I so hope you are right.
I mean, I'm not even. I really don't even like the word hope, but I think we can just, it's. This is kind of like my yeah, philosophical, phenomenological um, construct in a way that seems just as grounded to me as anything else. In that, yeah, like the Gaia, the Earth did a huge amount of work to get us here, um, and there is a kind of instinctive, kind of like something very instinctive in the human being that yearns for like freedom and communion and self-development and self-discovery and wonder, you know, and you know I could see society reconstellating around those once we've gotten through this capitalist meltdown, you know.
Yeah, I wanted to bring in an adjacent topic. We have talked now a lot about the Western world, yeah, US and the West, Europe. What I'm thinking a lot about is also like the whole question how this will have, like I live in India right now, and
Yeah.
India hasn't completely gone through all these stages that we just described. They are now in the middle of entering modernity fully and getting out of the tribal and the religious kind of states of minds and entering modernity fully and with a lot of the same aspirations as we now see that were probably not ideal. Let's put it like this. So when these big countries like China and India now are going through exactly the same cycles that already have proved to not be sustainable, I feel like that's one of the big challenges too. And one thing is, yeah, I just feel it's overwhelming because on one hand they want to benefit from the advances that modernity has brought, and they should not be denied that. On the other hand, we know already that it's just not sustainable. So
It's overwhelming. I completely agree. I mean, that was,
exactly.
it's completely, I mean, so, you know, as individuals, I think we just, we do what we can. We live like we must. Our doubt is our passion, and our passion is our art. I think that was Henry James's phrase. I mean, um, yeah, you know, we don't know what's coming.
Mhm.
It could be catastrophic. It could be extinction. And if that happens, so be it. Like as somebody who, believes is not maybe the right word, finds a lot of resonance with like Rudolf Steiner's perspective and had many, psychedelic experiences with dimethyltryptamine and other substances and ayahuasca that give me a sense that we're actually enmeshed in a much larger continuum of, super sensible and spiritual dimensions and realities that may be
Mhm.
infinite in nature. Um, I sense that there is, kind of an evolutionary underpinning, and even the most destructive and horrible things, maybe reveal a different side. If you could look at everything from a six-dimensional perspective, we're trapped in our little 3D or 4D perspectives. So whatever this is an evolutionary thing that's happening. And in a way, I feel very grateful to be in this time and witnessing it and experiencing it and co-creating with it. Um, and yeah, when the universe doesn't want me here anymore, it'll tell me.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
I have to leave in a minute though. You have one more.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, I think it's a good place to end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danielle.